There are television shows for everything from veterinarians to dating, and cars are no exception. And as a matter of fact, back before I had the attention span of an over-caffeinated rat, I used to watch some of these TV shows, and there were quite a few good ones, like Roadkill or Top Gear. But I would say that the bad ones, like the truly atrocious ones, were almost as memorable, if not more memorable in some ways. And while those good ones that I did mention previously were around, it always seemed like the car TV shows that channels like Velocity and Discovery had to offer were either mediocre or almost offensively terrible. And in today's video, I will be discussing a few of these worst or just cheesiest television shows that revolved around cars. The first and possibly least offensive of the shows on this list is Unique Rides, and Unique Rides follows Will Castro and his team at Worldwide Autosports in New York as they customize cars for some of the world's greatest performers and celebrities like LeBron James and Jason Derulo. And one of the things that always struck me about this show when I watched it, which I watched it a lot, especially in like 6th and 7th grade, was that the main character, I guess, Will Castro, never really did any work. And he always seemed to, he was able to line up the clients, but he never did any work in the shop. And, like, as far as, like, car shops go, a lot of the times, like, the owner knows how to do stuff as far as working on cars goes. And this guy never really gave me that impression. And it seems as if he wasn't really doing a great job of bookkeeping either, because I've seen a lot of stuff that points to the fact that his shop is bankrupt and maybe just didn't handle money the best. So it was always kind of a mystery what this guy did, except for shaking hands with the A-list celebrities. And the celebrities that were on this show were no less of characters than Will Castro himself. And while there were some that were like super famous, like Nas and Ice Cube, I think, there were oftentimes a lot more entertainment in the slightly less famous people on the show. And one such, I would say, D or F list celebrity that comes to mind is a poker player known as Will the Thrill. And if I remember correctly, Will had this Bentley that he wanted to get a sound system in. And he came in and he said all sorts of outlandish things. And he was possibly the least likable person I've ever seen on a television show. And it was hilarious. Like, my brother and I still joke about this guy to this day. And the other thing that kind of baffled me about this show was how little work they were willing to do. And I remember when Jason Derulo, who's I guess some big pop star, came in with a Cadillac Escalade that he wanted to do butterfly doors on. And that would have involved doing a certain amount of fabrication. And they said, well, no, we don't really want to void the warranty, and we just can't really do that work. And that's a valid point, but that's not the only instance where they were very shy about doing some sort of custom work that would have involved a lot of metal shaping and other stuff. Like, there was a lady, and I only really remember her because of her name. She was named Anastasia, which is a very goofy name. And she and her son wanted to do a old Caprice, I think. And this car was like a complete basket case, but it didn't look completely rusted out. But they still threw it away, even though it had significance to her. Because, oh, well, we don't want to do that sort of work. That's a lot of work. I ain't doing all that. And it just struck me as really stupid. And I feel like the only person on that show that really had, like, a good amount of talent was the upholstery guy. And, like, he did some pretty cool work, if I remember correctly. Like, especially on, I think it was Nas, who had a old Mercedes that they did. And that was, like, the only car I remember being like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. But I didn't know who Nas was at the time, so it just was kind of lost on me. But I think that of all the shows we're going to talk about today, this might be the most entertaining, while also the least cringeworthy. Another show on Velocity that I remember watching a lot, even though I didn't really like it, was Phantom Works. And Phantom Works, I don't really remember much about, but I do. I don't even remember the name of the guy that ran the shop, but I do remember this guy and all of his employees had possibly the worst attitude out of anyone I've ever seen. And, like, they would argue with each other, they would argue with the customer, and they would complain about doing the most simple jobs. Like, if you thought Unique Rides was bad, like, these people are 10 times worse. There was a customer, I think, that I remember this just because of how absurd it seemed to me, even back in 4th grade. I remember this customer brought in a Mustang, and he wanted to put a V8 in it, and it was like one of the older Mustangs, and it had an inline 6, and I feel like that would be a relatively straightforward thing to do, especially in this day and age of a lot of equipment, especially in a shop like this, and Summit Racing and Jegs and all those sort of mail order parts places that you can get stuff overnighted, and people make kits to do this, especially in a car they made millions of. And I always remember that they made such a big deal about putting a new engine, a new transmission, some new suspension parts, and a new rear end in this car. And it always confused me because, again, it's not really that much. Like, I'm not going to say I could do it in my garage, but I feel like that's something someone could at least do in their garage. And these guys had hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of tools and equipment to use. So I don't really recall why they made such a big deal out of it. And then the really funny or just kind of stupid thing about this show was every episode I remember, without fail, they take the customer in, and the customer's always like, well, we wanted to spend, say, $50,000 on this Camaro. And every single time they're like, well, I know you wanted to spend 50, but actually we spent 100. And every single time they like give the customer some massive guilt trip about spending more money than they had. Well, it's your fault. You're the expert. This customer doesn't know anything about cars. I mean, they're completely getting screwed over by these guys. And these guys don't really do what seems to be quality work. And like, I know I can't really talk because I've never really ever touched a car before, but there are so many other places that I'd imagine do better work at the same price or maybe even a better price than these guys, and they don't put it on TV. So I don't understand why the customer would even go there in the first place. But then these guys have the nerve to like humiliate the customer on TV. And I think I remember there was like this old lady that was building her dead husband's Cadillac, and I'm pretty sure he gave her a hard time about the price on that car too. So you can just really tell the sort of character we're dealing with here. And I would say Phantom Works is by far the worst of these shows, but the next few are just super cringy, and they're kind of related to each other. And these two TV shows are, respectively, Pimp My Ride and Inside West Coast Customs. And Pimp My Ride is an icon of the 90s and 2000s MTV sort of era of flashiness. And Pimp My Ride was, of course, hosted by the rapper Xzibit, and it revolved around people who had a beat-up old car, and Xzibit would come to their house and make fun of their beat-up old car, and then they would take it back and do some useless modifications that don't improve said beat-up old car at all, and just make it look really stupid. And Pimp My Ride is a very bizarre premise for a show, but it kind of made sense in the context of when it was made, and it resulted in all sorts of memes, and just, it's kind of an icon, whereas Inside West Coast Customs is the evolution of that, because Pimp My Ride happened at West Coast Customs, but this is more taking supercars and newer cars and modifying them for celebrities than just regular people's regular cars, but they're still just equally as tasteless. Like, Travis Scott, he has a Aventador, a Lamborghini Aventador, and they did it, and I think they wrapped it, or they might have painted it in brown, and it has white wheels, and I think some custom interior. And, like, it's a little bit of work, but not, like, something crazy. And it's really ugly. Like, it looks like a Cadbury egg, you know, with the ones with the cream in the middle, if you, like, crack it open, because it's got the brown, and then it's got the white on the wheels and all that. Another car they did, and this is kind of stepping out of the mold that Unique Rides was in, where it was doing custom work but not really modifying anything too crazy except for like the interior stuff. They did a Rolls Royce for Justin Bieber, and it was completely redone to look like some concept car from like 2016. and it was horrendously ugly because the concept car was like super like futuristic and all that, and the wheels were like away from the body and it was electric, and there was like certain stuff you just can't do on a normal car, and they tried to do that and it just ended up looking silly. And I think that that's kind of the theme with West Coast Customs, is they do stuff that I guess would look good on paper maybe or as a drawing, but in real life it just looks stupid. And that also kind of seems to be the deal with Pimp My Ride, which a lot of the stuff they did on that show was like, I feel like a bunch of dudes sat around a table and were like, "Oh, it'd be cool if we put a fish tank in this car. Wow, that'd be something else." And they just did crazy stuff just to do crazy stuff and to drum up interest on TV. And in the instance of West Coast Customs, they're doing the crazy stuff because the people that are buying the cars from them want to do crazy stuff and get attention. Anyways, I think that's probably it for this video, and I'll see you guys next video. And if you enjoyed this, please make sure to like and subscribe. And tell me what you thought of these shows and if there are any ones I missed in the comments, because I'm sure there are.